The restaurant was glowing. Warm lights, soft jazz, the kind of place where everything feels rehearsed but perfect. David and I were celebrating our anniversary, and for a moment I let myself believe in that word, celebrating. The air smelled like truffle butter and wine, and laughter from nearby tables blended with ours. When the waiter brought the check, his smile was polite, easy. Then he said it, the sentence that split the night in two. "You ordered the same dish as last time, right?" I laughed, thinking it was some harmless mix-up. "Last time? We've never been here before," I said. But then he hesitated. Just a second, but enough. I saw David's eyes flicker, that tiny, nervous swallow, the kind you can feel in your bones when something's off. "He's mistaken," David said quickly, his voice too smooth. "Maybe someone who looks like me was here." Maybe. Though my gut told me otherwise. I smiled at the waiter, calm and collected. Maybe. Though it's hard to forget that face, right? The poor man turned crimson and hurried off, leaving behind a silence so thick it nearly hummed. David changed the subject, pretending nothing had happened. I played along, nodding, smiling, even laughing once or twice. But inside, something had shifted, like a thread pulled loose from silk. My appetite vanished, replaced by a quiet certainty. The waiter wasn't wrong, and I'll remember this night forever. After that moment, the evening moved like a slow dance I didn't want to finish. David talked about work, about his new project, about nothing that mattered. His words were background noise, something soft to hide behind. I smiled when expected, nodded when I had to, pretending not to notice the way his hand twitched each time our eyes met. The candles flickered against his face, and I wondered if guilt had a temperature, because he looked flushed, and I felt cold. The waiter passed by once more, avoiding my gaze. The sound of his shoes against the marble floor felt louder than the music. I could almost hear the echo of his earlier words repeating in my mind over and over. The same dish as last time. How could something so ordinary suddenly sound like a confession? I reached for my glass, but the wine tasted different now. Bitter, even though it wasn't. David raised his glass to toast. "To us," he said. "To us." The phrase landed flat, like an empty promise. I forced a smile, the kind that hides more than it shows, and took a sip just to keep the silence company. Outside, I could see our reflection in the restaurant window. Two people who looked happy, in love, complete. But reflections lie. I knew that now. I sat there, memorizing every detail, his smile, his tone, his ease, because I had a feeling I'd need them later. When dessert came, I barely touched it. The chocolate soufflé sank in front of me, untouched, like something beautiful collapsing under its own weight. David didn't notice, or pretended not to. He was busy talking about a client, his hands moving animatedly as if passion could erase guilt. I watched him the way one watches a stranger on a train, familiar face, unknown destination, and I thought, what else don't I know about you? The waiter returned with the receipt, avoiding eye contact this time. His politeness had turned brittle, like glass about to crack. David reached for the check too quickly, fumbling for his card, his smile strained. "We'll be back soon," he said, and I almost laughed. Soon? He already had been. I thanked the waiter softly, my voice steady, and slipped my coat on with deliberate calm, the kind that hides a storm. As we walked out, the night air felt sharper, the city lights too bright to look at directly. David took my hand, and I let him, just for show. Each step echoed like a countdown in my mind, steady and certain. By the time we reached the car, my decision was already made. I wasn't going to accuse him. Not yet. No, I was going to remember. Because remembering is where revenge begins. That night, after dinner, the house felt colder than usual, as if the warmth from the restaurant never followed us home. David kissed me goodnight and went straight to the shower, humming like a man with a clean conscience. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the dark window. My dress still smelled faintly of truffle butter and betrayal. The sound of running water behind the bathroom door only made the silence heavier. I couldn't unhear the waiter's words. The same dish as last time. I reached for my phone, my fingers steady, too steady for someone who was about to cross an invisible line. Our shared credit card statement was always there, digital and neat, listing our lives in tidy rows. I scrolled down, groceries, gas, work lunches, and then I saw it, the restaurant, the same one. 2 weeks earlier. My heart didn't race, it sank. Because part of me had already known it was there. When David came out, towel around his waist, his hair damp, I looked up as if nothing had happened. "You were working late 2 Fridays ago, right?" I asked casually. He nodded, yawning, rubbing his hair dry. "Yeah, client dinner ran long. Why?" he said, eyes half closed. I smiled, the kind of smile that hides a wound. "No reason," I said softly. "Just wondering what you ordered." He laughed, relaxed, careless, and kissed my forehead. And that's when I knew. I'd stop asking questions. I'd start finding answers. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, bright and almost mocking. David was already gone, leaving behind the faint scent of his cologne and a half-drunk cup of coffee. I sat at the table, staring at the steam curling up from my mug, wondering when love had started to feel like evidence. Every little thing, the misplaced receipts, the late-night texts labeled urgent, the careful charm, began to rearrange themselves into something I didn't want to recognize. Denial is a kind of comfort, but comfort dies quickly when you've seen too much. I spent the day moving through routine, laundry, errands, polite smiles at the grocery store, but my mind never left that restaurant. The waiter's face, his hesitation, his attempt to recover. It replayed in loops, like a film I couldn't stop watching. I told myself I was overthinking it, that people make mistakes. But there's a particular kind of silence between a husband and wife that tells the truth more clearly than words ever could. And hours had started to stretch. That evening, David came home humming again, the same easy rhythm. He asked how my day was, and I said fine. He kissed my cheek, his lips brushing mine with habitual affection. Nothing more. I watched him from across the room as he loosened his tie and laughed at something on his phone. His world seemed intact. Mine was beginning to fracture, and I realized then, whatever he was hiding, it was time to see it for myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, every tick of the clock too loud. I stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible cracks in the dark, thinking about how trust doesn't break in one moment. It crumbles slowly, piece by piece. I thought about our wedding vows, about the way David used to look at me like I was the center of his world. And now he barely noticed when I drifted out of it. It wasn't pain I felt, it was clarity, cold, clean, necessary. When the clock hit midnight, I got up and walked to the kitchen. The city outside was asleep, but my mind wasn't. I opened a notebook and started writing, not words, but dates, receipts, clues. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger is loud, but what I felt was quiet, like the calm before lightning. I wanted truth, not confrontation. Proof, not noise. Because if I was right, I'd only get one chance to use it. The next morning, David kissed me goodbye, and I smiled like nothing had changed. I packed his lunch, handed him his briefcase, and waved from the door like the perfect wife. When the car disappeared down the street, I finally exhaled. The house felt weightless, emptied of performance. That's when I decided I'd go back to the restaurant. If the truth was there, I'd find it. And when I did, I wouldn't just forgive or forget. I'd remember, and make him remember too. The next day, I dressed with unusual care, not to impress, but to control the image I'd present. Neutral colors, simple jewelry, a calm face. My hands didn't shake, though maybe they should have. The drive to the restaurant felt longer than it was, every red light daring me to turn back. But I didn't. Some truths you don't run from. You walk straight into them. When I parked, my pulse was steady. Too steady, maybe, like a rehearsed lie. Inside, the air smelled just as it had before: garlic, wine, a hint of something sweet that didn't belong to me. The same soft jazz played, the same waiter moved between tables, his expression careful. When he saw me, his smile faltered just slightly. "Good afternoon," he said, voice polite but uneasy. I matched it with my own, polite, controlled, disarming. "Hi," I said softly. "I was here last night. My husband was mistaken for someone who'd been here before." He blinked, recognition flickering behind his eyes. "Oh, yes, ma'am. My apologies for that," he murmured, shifting on his feet. I tilted my head, watching him closely. No need to apologize. I was just curious. The woman he was with, she must have looked a lot like me. My tone was light, almost teasing. But inside, I was holding my breath. This was the moment the truth would either dissolve or finally take shape. The waiter hesitated, his eyes darting toward the kitchen as if help might be hiding there. "Ma'am," he began softly, "I really shouldn't say." I leaned in just enough for my voice to lower, a whisper edged with warmth. "Please, I won't tell anyone." There was a pause, long enough for me to hear the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the bar. Then he sighed, shoulders softening under invisible weight. "She was younger," he said quietly. "Red hair. They seemed close." My throat tightened, but I kept my expression calm, polite, even kind. "Did he say anything?" I asked, forcing the words through a mouth that suddenly felt dry. The waiter hesitated again, guilt painting his features. "He said it was their little hideaway," he admitted, almost apologetically. The phrase hit me like a slap wrapped in silk. Their hideaway. A secret home built inside a lie. I nodded slowly, thanking him with a smile that wasn't real. When he left to serve another table, I just stood there, staring at the space where David must have sat, maybe laughing, maybe leaning in close, his hand on someone else's wrist. I could almost see it. 2 glasses of wine, 1 candle between them, the same steak, the same jokes, the same charm. Everything he did with me, he rehearsed with her first. I felt the betrayal curl through me, not like fire, but like frost. Cold, quiet, permanent. I thanked the waiter again, my voice steady though my heartbeat wasn't. As I walked toward the door, I caught my reflection in the restaurant's mirror, perfectly composed, hair neat, lipstick still intact. No one would have guessed I'd just confirmed my husband's affair. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes with silence, with a spine that straightens instead of breaking. I walked out into the daylight, the sun almost too bright to face. The drive home felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's story. The city passed by in blurred colors, couples crossing streets, laughter spilling from cafes, people living lives they trusted. My hands gripped the steering wheel, cold against the leather. I wasn't crying. I didn't want to. Crying meant it still hurt. But this was something else, the kind of calm that comes when your world burns down quietly, without smoke. When I parked in front of our house, I sat there for a long time, engine off, mind awake. The facts lined up in my head like chess pieces. The waiter, the receipt, the lie, every move David had made, I could now predict. But he didn't know me as well as he thought. That night at the restaurant was his repetition. The next one would be mine, but with a different ending. I didn't confront him. Not that night, not the next. Confrontation would have given him control, the power to lie, to explain, to twist the story back into something bearable. No, I wanted him unaware. I wanted him comfortable, confident, blind. So when I suggested a dinner party to celebrate his promotion, his smile was genuine. "That's sweet of you," he said, kissing my forehead like I was the one who should be grateful. I smiled back and began to plan. The list came together easily. His colleagues, a few friends, people who admired him, the perfect audience. I called the same restaurant and made the reservation under his name. "Same table as before," I told the hostess. The words slid out effortlessly. Each task, each phone call, each tiny detail felt surgical, precise. There's something liberating about turning pain into choreography. It was no longer emotion, it was execution. In the days leading up to it, I played the perfect wife. I laughed at his jokes, packed his lunch, sent texts that said, "Miss you." I even kissed him goodnight without flinching. He had no idea. I watched him move around the house, humming, smiling, convinced he was untouchable. But revenge, I've learned, doesn't announce itself. It arrives dressed as normalcy, until it sits down right across from you at dinner. The night arrived dressed in elegance. The restaurant glowed again, that same amber light spilling over polished glasses and silverware. I wore black, simple, graceful, unassuming. David looked proud, charming, every inch the successful man surrounded by admiration. Our guests toasted to his hard work, his dedication, his perfect life. I smiled through it all, my voice light, my laughter steady. But underneath, I could feel the pulse of the secret waiting at the table with us. The waiter from before recognized us the instant he approached. His eyes widened slightly, just enough for me to notice. "Good evening," he said cautiously. I met his gaze with a kind of warmth that warned him not to speak. He nodded almost imperceptibly and went on with his service. Every plate he set down, every refill of wine, felt like the quiet ticking of a clock winding toward something inevitable. I barely tasted my food. I was too busy savoring the anticipation. David leaned over, whispering, "You've outdone yourself tonight." I turned to him and smiled, soft and genuine enough to make him believe it. "Oh, I just wanted everyone to see what a wonderful husband I have," I said. The irony sat on my tongue like fine wine, smooth, dark, intoxicating. He squeezed my hand under the table, completely unaware that he was already in the middle of his own undoing. Dessert arrived, a delicate crème brûlée with a perfect golden crust. The waiter cleared the plates with quiet precision, but before he could step away, I looked up at him, smiling sweetly. "Excuse me," I said, my tone soft, almost affectionate. "Would you mind bringing my husband's usual?" A ripple of confusion crossed his face, and then understanding. "Of course," he said slowly. "The steak with truffle butter, medium rare?" Around us, conversation hushed, like the air itself was listening. "Exactly," I replied, holding his gaze. "The one he had 2 weeks ago, with the redhead." The sound of glass hitting the table, a fork clinking, that's all I heard before silence swallowed the room whole. David froze. His color drained, his mouth parted, but no words came. "Anna, what are you doing?" he finally whispered. I leaned back, calm, collected, the picture of serenity. "Just confirming your order history," I said. "You've been such a loyal customer." The guests stared, their faces caught between disbelief and pity. The waiter stood motionless, torn between duty and shock. David reached for my hand, but I pulled it away slowly, deliberately. "Dinner's on you, dear," I said, rising from my chair. "After all, you've had plenty of practice paying here." And then I walked out, chin high, step steady, leaving behind whispers, shame, and the faint scent of truffle and smoke. Revenge, it turned out, had a taste after all. By the next morning, the story had already begun to spread. People talk, especially when silence feels too heavy to carry. David's promotion celebration had turned into something else entirely. Colleagues whispered, friends pretended not to know. His name floated through polite conversations like a ghost everyone was too embarrassed to mention. I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth had its own wings, and it flew fast. At home, the silence between us was unbearable. Not loud, not angry, just hollow. He tried to act as though everything could be fixed with words, with explanations, with time. But time doesn't heal humiliation. It just lets it breathe. He stood in the kitchen that evening, hands in his pockets, voice trembling. "You didn't have to do that in front of everyone," he said. His tone carried a strange mix of shame and accusation, as if I were the one who'd broken the vows. I leaned against the counter, arms folded, meeting his eyes with a stillness he couldn't shake. "You didn't have to bring someone else there before me," I said simply. The words weren't loud, but they landed hard. He swallowed, his face twisting. "It was a mistake," he muttered. I almost laughed, a short, humorless sound. "A mistake you ordered twice." His gaze dropped to the floor. Mine stayed right where it belonged, forward. He stood there for a long time, staring at me like a man seeing his own reflection after a storm. Unrecognizable, smaller somehow. "I can explain," he said, his voice breaking under the weight of words that had already lost their meaning. But I was done listening to stories. He had spent months writing lies between dinners, texts, and excuses. Now it was my turn to close the book. I reached for the envelope on the counter and held it out to him. He looked at it as if it might burn him. "What's this?" he asked, though he already knew. "Divorce papers," I said evenly. My tone wasn't angry. It was calm, final, like a door closing quietly. "You can keep your usual table," I added. "You'll need it for your next little hideaway." He flinched, but I didn't stay to watch. I turned, climbed the stairs, and felt something I hadn't in months. Lightness. The kind that doesn't come from happiness, but from release. In our bedroom, the air felt different. The bed looked wider, cleaner somehow. I opened the window, letting the night breeze in, cool and sharp against my skin. Somewhere downstairs, I heard the faint sound of paper crumpling, then silence. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel watched, doubted, or diminished. I just felt free. Revenge hadn't healed me, but it had returned something far more valuable: my dignity. The next few days passed like a slow exhale. He moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding my eyes, speaking only in fragments. There were no grand apologies, no tears, just silence, heavy and resigned. I think he finally understood that some losses can't be undone, only remembered. His suitcase sat by the door for 2 days before he took it. When the door finally closed behind him, the sound wasn't sad. It was clean, necessary. I spent that evening alone, pouring myself a glass of wine at the same hour he used to come home. The quiet didn't bother me anymore. It felt earned. Every reflection in the glass, every soft click of my heels on the tile, reminded me that I'd survived the kind of betrayal that breaks some women in half. But instead of breaking, I'd learned to balance, to turn pain into power without raising my voice. Dignity, I realized, was its own form of vengeance. Later, as I tidied the kitchen, I caught my reflection in the window. Not the woman who'd sat silently at a dinner table weeks ago, but someone steadier, stronger, untouched by pity. I smiled at her, at myself, and whispered, "You did it." Outside, the city lights flickered like small promises of something new. Tomorrow, I'd make a reservation, but not for 2, not anymore. 6 months later, I walked back into the same restaurant, not as a wife, not as a shadow, but as myself. The familiar scent of seared butter and wine drifted through the air, and for a fleeting moment, I remembered the night everything began. The waiter saw me and froze for half a second, recognition flickering across his face. "Welcome back, ma'am," he said carefully. "Table for one?" His voice carried a trace of history, but I met it with warmth instead of bitterness. "No," I said, smiling. "Table for 4. Behind me, laughter trailed in. My friends, radiant, confident, loud in the best way. The hostess led us to a corner table, sunlight spilling through the windows like forgiveness. I caught sight of the old table across the room, his table, and felt nothing. No ache, no anger, just distance, the kind that heals. The waiter smiled nervously and I grinned. "And make sure," I added, "it's not the one he used to sit at." He chuckled, finally relaxing. "Understood." As we sat down, I lifted my glass, the cool stem firm in my fingers. My friends laughed and shared stories, their voices filling every corner of the room that once held my silence. I clinked my glass gently against theirs, letting the moment settle like music after a storm. For the first time in a long time, the taste in my mouth wasn't betrayal. It was freedom.